Welcome to the All Hail the Fail podcast, the podcast that celebrates messing up spectacularly, embarrassing yourself repeatedly, and failing forward. I'm your host, Bontle, executive consultant, coach, author, and proud of every failure and rejection it took to get me there. Today's guest is Sara-Louise Ackrill. Sara is a Harley Street therapist and an entrepreneur working in neurodiversity. Sara's autistic and has ADHD herself, and she works with over 16s. But more than that, I think it's incredibly important to point out that she's also an incredibly cool person, a social entrepreneur, a speaker, is very excited about every project she's in and is involved in so many of them, so many great ideas. And I am thrilled to have her here. So Sara, how are you?
Thank you so much for that. That was really nice. I'm fine, thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's not something I would normally choose to talk about, so I'm looking forward to the challenge.
That's what I love is nobody wants to talk about their failures.
No, right?
Actually. Yeah. But
I
it's
love how
so nice.
subversively proud you are.
I know I'm so thrilled to talk about it because I do think it's actually I've been so inspired by hearing people who I respect so much talk about the things that they did not get to share on LinkedIn because it was not that positive and exciting. So that's
Yeah,
why
yeah,
I do
yeah.
this. So tell me, first question,
Great.
if your best friend was introducing you at a conference, what would they say?
Well, I think they would say positive things. I think they'd describe me as a therapist first and foremost, and they'd say that I have a team, that we work in neurodiversity, and hopefully they'd say some nice personal stuff too, like, I'm nice. Um,
Hopefully, yeah.
yeah, I think that's about it. I think those are the main things that at a conference somebody would want to get across about me.
Okay. And what are you most proud of achieving in your professional life?
I think Wired Differently, which is my company, in terms of creating it, because I said to someone before the first lockdown hit, I'm not a creative person. And it was something I had not wanting to say for years. And then I admitted to apparently not being a creative person. And then 9 months later, proved myself completely wrong because I just didn't feel I had much imagination. And I think the first year was crazy because I wasn't doing something I'd ever seen done before, this kind of portfolio business specializing in neurodiversity, putting out there my diagnoses and assessments in order to support other people through my skill sets and then developing skill sets I didn't have before in order to create this thing. And there was no model for it. And I'd never done something before which just didn't exist. It was a really weird process. And sometimes I'd be like, am I kidding myself? Is this really happening? And at other times I'd be really proud. So it was just a really odd thing to create something from scratch. It made me think about what someone must feel like when they're sculpting or painting or writing something because it there was just no model for it. So I'm super proud of that because sometimes it was like being in a black hole and I just had to have faith that something would materialize from nothing. Really,
Yeah.
really odd, exciting process. So I think that's what I'm most proud of.
And it's interesting for me that the business that you started, when I talk about wired differently to other people, and to some people who are neurotypical, right, who don't have autism, ADHD,
Hmm.
dyslexia, any of the beautiful family of neurospiciness, they they hear about, hey, there's this service where they'll help you find coaching and support and it's a community, but also they'll do practical things for you so they can like be your assistant and
Yep.
help you apply for like support and funding so they can pay themselves with the funding that they have helped you apply for. And people are blown away that the service, they're like, can I also get an assistant and a coach and some work support and some career advice and some like so what gap in the market made you think that this specifically for neurodivergent people would be a game changer?
Well, actually, it was a client of mine. So I decided that I would go back into coaching and therapy, having had a 2 year sabbatical after a abusive relationship. And I was kind of nervous about it. And I didn't want to do that full time because I didn't want to get burnout. And I have always had a bit of a helicopter vision of support. And I just decided, you know how in the lockdown everyone was able to give some time to their kind of, well, what have I always wanted to do? And all the projects that you've started but didn't finish. And I just pulled out all my paperwork and my training and all the courses I'd been on. And I just did this like mood board in my head of all the things I wanted to do. And you know what? Being a therapist and a coach, you hear all the time about, oh, I just wish I had support with XYZ. So then I just started creating it. And one of my skill sets was I had been a PA before to someone at head office at one of the big hotel chains in Paris. And I thought, well, I'll do that because that's quite desensitizing and not coachy and therapy-ish. And it will pay the bills. And then the first person to ring said, oh my God, this is genius. You're doing this for ADHDers. And I was like, am I? Oh yeah, okay. I'm gonna run with that. But I said to her, you need to know this was not my idea, and I'm so grateful to you. And then it just took off. But she just assumed that that's what I was doing. And I'm so grateful. I heard from her yesterday, and I'm always saying to people, actually, this wasn't my idea. But then everything else came on top of that. So yeah, that was very insightful of her. So I'm really grateful to that client.
I mean, that's what makes great entrepreneurs, though, right? Is like lots of people can come up with awesome ideas and have this like spring of creativity. Very few people will then go, okay, cool, I'm going to go do that now. Right.
Well, it was handy that this person doesn't at all work in that sector and I could run with that and it could be my thing. But then, you know, in startup culture, there's that whole what is an idea really worth? Because,
yeah,
like you say, you can have ideas, you've got to put time behind it and money and belief and vision and all of that. And I find that quite interesting in startup culture because you know what? The difference between me and someone having an idea has actually been an army of people who are there for me as well, because there are times where there's issues with, say, cash flow or there's issues with whatever. And I'm very, very lucky that people will be like, what's stressing you? Or my mentor will get on a call and within a minute he knows that there's something not okay. And people actually looking for things I'm not, you know, listening out for what I'm not saying. And yeah, the difference between someone having an idea and having an idea that goes somewhere is quite often their network. So I really, really feel lucky to have that.
It is. And that's probably the part of startup culture and being an entrepreneur, especially in the bro culture part of startup
culture. Don't get me started on bro culture.
To talk about, yeah, let's not. But no one wants to admit that actually that's how everyone gets on, right? That's how everyone's successful, is with an army of people who are supporters and people who will back your idea even when you are not super excited about it and not thinking it's working, and who will help you with a bit of money here. And, you know, all of those things, we put so much emphasis on the founder, and it's all the founder and it's all the founder's reputation, experience, etc. And we don't like to hear that founders actually had a bunch of people in the background who were just kind of supporting them. Like,
absolutely,
we want to imagine them as these singular geniuses. So I think it's really important also to point out that there is an alternative model, which for me is the real model, where it is about taking all the resources available to you. And some of those will be financial, and some of those will be skills, and some of them will be past jobs that you did not think were related in any way. And some of them will be people.
Yeah, one of the past jobs that I am so grateful for is I spent something like 5 years in recruitment. I would say that that has been super useful. And also, I was a disability and employment specialist, which meant that I could then work with people. You know, when people come for coaching and therapy, they very often want to sort some stuff out, but then they'll be like, right, now I know who I am and now I'm super confident. I actually don't like my job, or I want to have my own business. And I have the skill set to go, let's carry on then. Whereas some people might have to say, well, I'll refer you on at that case, you know, at that point. Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I'm grateful for those two jobs specifically. Really amazing skill sets.
So great. And an inspiration to people who are listening, going like, how will my current job help me in the future? You never know.
Yeah. You're right. You're right. And every single job you can make into your own. I had a boss say to me once, everything you do, you run it like it's your own business in a way that you take ownership, you learn from it. You're constantly trying to work out, how can I use this in the future? I totally agree with you. Yeah, I think that's the way to go. It's far more motivating. You see it as part of, you know, that saying about, you know, if you don't have a plan, you end up being part of someone else's.
Yeah.
So whatever job you do, you can make it part of your plan, very much so.
That is very true. And I'm so glad we've now established how awesome you are, so we can talk about your failures. Tell me about a time you failed spectacularly.
Well, there's so many elements to this. I mean, one is the thing that I spent so long processing, and when I look back at my biggest failure, what I see now is the way I dealt with it was the failure, not the thing itself. So
Ooh.
I didn't get the grade I wanted at university. And my tutor said, you obviously give the impression of being far more intelligent than you really are, which was helpful and
Wow.
sensitive. I know, right? Yeah, that was interesting. I saw him in Tesco's years later, and he was really keen to talk to me. And weirdly, I wasn't that interested
Strange.
over the sprouts. Yeah, exactly.
Really
Um,
weird.
but
You
but
wouldn't be.
I know. Strangely, he wasn't on my Christmas card list. It was weird. But I think that at the time this is embarrassing, but I'm just gonna say it. For 10 years, I did not get over the fact that I didn't get the grade I wanted. And it's not so much about what the grade was, because if I had a client come to me now saying this was the grade I got, I'd be like, do you realize how much you went through to get that and how much that meant to you and how hard you work? So it's not about like, I meet people with firsts that didn't get a high first and they're absolutely gutted. And I meet people with a 2-2 or a third or a fail and they're gutted. So it's not about so much what the grade was. It's about, for some reason for me, I had internalized I know I'm bright. I need to get a really good mark, even though I could see the people around me were far better educated, more motivated. They got it a lot more. I didn't get it. I struggled. I tried in a very awkward way to get some support. I just didn't make the grade. And but you know what? I look back on that and I think that's almost an embarrassment that I thought that was such a failure. But the failure was that it took me 10 years to get over it. And now, when I look at younger people around me going through that, say this year, I'm just in awe at how people just pick themselves up and crack on and how much more resilient and level-headed they are about it. I was obsessed. Like I got this thing in my head that I had to just keep applying for master's degrees and getting accepted. So I did. I got accepted to 3 master's degrees, but I didn't do them because it was like an obsession as to who wants me, who wants me, who wants me, because I felt so utterly like a failure. And I now see how utterly unhealthy that was. And I would be pretty firm with any of my clients who came to me going, you know what, it took 10 years. I'd be like, what? Did you not see any other quality in yourself but that?
I mean, I actually find it kind of endearing though, because someone would look at you and go, but after everything you've achieved, that's the thing that really hurts you. And I think that's like the crux of what makes it so painful though, is because it's those sort of things that you can't even admit to others that you're still in pain about that, because
Well,
it
at the time
seems
I
like
was
the
only
sort of thing that would be
22.
petty. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're looking back on it now. I mean, I'm 44 and I'm looking back on it and I'm like, God, I can't believe that that got me so bad. I mean, I know now that I have emotional dysregulation. At the time, I had the most shocking low self-esteem. And people are surprised when I say I used to be, many, many years ago, I used to be quite an angry person. I was a very insecure person. I was constantly thinking that success and whatever was for other people or luck was for other people. Just completely misguided, really. My mental health was shocking. I just look back on that and think, God, I was so lost, and I have
Yeah.
compassion, but at the time it was dramatic. And it does go to show that with some hindsight, you look back on things and you think, wow, I can't believe that was such a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. But what did you try to do to recover from that failure, right? And how many times, how long until it actually started to work?
I think that as with a lot of my clients, the only thing that got me away from those sorts of feelings about anything, because I mean, that's by far my own, a long way from being my only so-called failure or perceived failure. Because also, what is a failure? A failure is subjective, right?
Totally.
And I think that's the point of you doing this, is that as I was thinking about coming on this, I was thinking, is it okay to say that that was a failure and now I don't see it as one? And I was like, well, yeah, because I've changed, I've matured, and now what I would perceive as a failure would be different. I'm not saying, oh, well, now I think I just can't fail. I would just look at different things as failures now, like social stuff, for example. because I get rejection sensitive dysphoria, rejection sensitivity. So
Same.
I do get periods. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I get periods
Yes.
where I'm like, oh God, I really messed up that social thing. You can't mess up a social thing by its nature. It's social. You were being social. You may have been being awkward. You may have been being right or wrong or funny or attractive or not, or no one liked you, but you didn't fail because it just is. So interesting.
I
But to
mean,
answer your question,
mm.
yeah, I didn't do enough, really. I think I just kept it to myself, in all honesty.
So you didn't try to fix it?
I think I was so ashamed I just didn't talk to anyone. I think my parents had an idea. I kind of went off the rails after that, and my mental health really suffered even more. I think I turned to things, in your questions, it was like, what did you do about this? And I was thinking,
Yeah.
am I allowed to say, went to the doctor and got depressed and had
Yeah.
really awful thoughts? Like, I want to
Yes.
say I had loads of
Say
coaching
it.
and
Because I mean, this is the thing, like people have this idea that like you fail and then like you were sad for a little bit, but then you pick yourself up because you're so resilient and a strong woman. And I'm like,
yeah, no, I wasn't at all. I had no resilience in my body at that point. I didn't know what resilience meant, really. I love how they teach it in schools now.
do they?
Yeah, they teach resilience now. I love that.
Are they accepting adult applications?
Can we go together and be
There we
buddies?
go. I mean, and it's great that you bring up RSD and this rejection sensitivity because I actually had an interaction just this morning where I've
Okay,
kind of like been brought into like a new friend group and I
okay.
don't know any people besides like the two people that I'm in the friend group and everyone was
Yep,
sending around like photos of them in the snow in the winter because it's snow time in the UK apparently. And
yep,
I sent a photo of my
apparently.
dog and I, yeah, I sent a photo of my dog and I in the snow, and no one responded to it. And then other people just kept on sending photos, and then they were responding to the other photos, and I was like, oh no, they hate
Oh,
not in the group. And it's so weird because I was honestly like, I'm not over it, but I also now know what it is. And so I just go
yes.
like, yeah, you feel those feelings, but they're very much in your head. This is like a you thing, not a them thing.
Yes,
So,
exactly. It doesn't
you
go
know,
away, but we know what it is now, right?
yeah. And so I don't know if that helps me or not, because back to your thing about like, social situations aren't failures. In my head, I was like, oh, but I think that all the time. Like I'm always
Oh,
evaluating
I do. Yeah.
my
Yeah.
performance in a social
Yeah.
setting, right? Because it does feel a little bit like, yes, I was there to socialize as a grown woman on a date. And I performed very well in the competencies of communication, smiling, eye contact, and making flirty suggestions.
Tick, 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 tick.
So I'm a bit like that is, and maybe that even for people who are neurotypical, it might actually be something that they are doing where they see many of their social interactions with friends, with family, and
Yep.
not meeting their expectations they had in their minds as failures. And I I think I don't see them as failures, but I don't see them as good things either. So I don't know what the middle ground is. They're not wins, but they're not.
Yes. Yeah, I get that. And if I get home after a social thing, I'm loath to then go, oh, great, that went really well, because then I think, well, that's just the other side of the same coin. Don't judge at all because it just is. Don't tell yourself you did really well because that means that you could also tell yourself you did really badly.
And you should not believe either of those things. You should just not think about it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes yeah, it is tough though, I think, to be able to regulate your feelings in that way, especially when you are neurospicy. And I do often come back from social interactions that I really enjoyed and then
Yep.
like burst into tears as soon as I'm alone. And I'm like,
Oh,
why
yeah.
are you sad about that? Like that was fun. What was wrong? And then I'm like, oh, but I could have been better. And like
Oh my
could
God, I
have
hear
happened
you.
again. And people that I guess is the side that people don't see of people who they perceive as being extroverted and outgoing and able and
Yeah.
socially competent, right?
Yeah. People would never imagine it. I know if I do speaking, I'm always really open about this stuff, and people are like, really? Do you
Yeah.
actually get like that? And I can't believe it's not obvious because I just know myself. So I don't think that I present in a certain way. I don't try to present in a certain way. I put my meltdowns on LinkedIn. I mean, I always get DMs from people going, I'm really glad you posted that because I
Yeah, it's
feel like
great.
that too. And
I love it.
yeah,
I love it. I should be posting more of my meltdowns, but I feel that they would be daily, and so it'd be very awkward. But it might actually help convince people that I really am autistic, because I do sometimes feel like people think I'm not, and that I am on some level.
yeah,
Like, people are always like, well, everyone has a little bit of, and I'm like, no, no, no,
yeah. It's not
not
a
like
little. We know this.
so. I do think it does help also to normalize, like, yes, I can be very competent at many things and still probably be autistic.
It does, but I think also there are some things that I wouldn't necessarily post. I try for there to always be, I mean, it is LinkedIn. I try for there to always be a link so it's not too gratuitous, but I admit there are a couple of times I've posted because there have been times where only people on LinkedIn in my little DEI neurodiversity bubble might get it. And that's really helped. I mean, yeah,
Yes,
there are definitely 2 or 3 times in the last year when I've literally posted for the catharsis, to be honest.
yes, yes. I did that earlier this week, so yeah, I feel you. And I also think, like, where else are we supposed to post now, right? Like,
Yeah,
Twitter, it's a no.
I'm not keen on
Instagram,
Twitter.
no. I mean, I loved Twitter at some point. I've gone very off it. I think we
Same,
don't
actually.
talk about why we've gone off it, but it's
Yeah,
not really a safe space anymore. Instagram, I was never particularly a visual person, and my
same.
Instagram is private, so it is honestly for people who actually know me and who were like actually
Yes,
kind of my friends.
that's different.
Facebook, who uses Facebook for those purposes anymore? I do not know.
I don't
Um,
use Facebook for business at all.
no, but I also don't want to expose myself to people who I went to high school with. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
it's not the vibe. And so, TikTok is too fun. I love TikTok. So really, I'm left with LinkedIn. Basically, where else am I supposed to share my thoughts? It's a real problem.
Which is hilarious because if we were saying this to a lot of people, they'd be like, but LinkedIn is the last place you would put that stuff because they see it as super corporate. But it depends on what you do for a living and why you're on there, I guess.
I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true. And
It's a
to be
different
honest, I think as
bubble.
a coach, it's okay to be talking about some of
Yeah.
those things.
Well, I think as an ND coach, because I get neurotypical people saying, what on earth would you want to put that on LinkedIn for?
Really?
Yeah, but I always get people say, oh, it's really important to me that my coach gets it. Do you have space? And I'm like, well, I didn't post for that, but that's great because I never imagined that. In fact, if anything, I wondered if it would harm my reputation. But I
Yeah, I
feel
often think that.
neurodivergent people like authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it is much easier to be able to relate to someone if you know that they already relate to you.
I think so too. I mean, I have to say, would I contact a coach or therapist who was publicly talking about their stuff? Definitely, depending on how they presented it and how they analyzed it. I mean, there's definitely a way. I don't want someone just splurging in an unboundaried manner. That would really put me off. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Speaking of, what did you learn from this failure versus what you tell people you learned from this failure, right?
I love this question. I really love this question. It's just like it's just
It's one of my favorites.
unbridled honesty with you. I love that. Do you know that's such a good question? And right now, I feel the two are the same thing because I'm 20 years later. I'm not trying to gloss it over. I am 2 decades on. I honestly think that what I'm telling you today I learned is what I learned. 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have said what you needed to say to look good, like you said about, oh, I
Yeah,
failed, but let's not focus on that because my recovery was amazing and
yeah,
I'm so resilient, as you said. But yeah, 10 years ago, I would probably have said something like, I learned to, analyze, maybe take responsibility. I think I would have focused on, I learned to take responsibility and clearly it wasn't meant to be and I should have put more effort in and maybe the teachers could have been a bit more communicative and helpful. I mean, I must say, I do have a massive concern about neurodiversity and mental health in universities in
yeah.
general, because now it's come around to me working with university students, particularly in my Harley Street caseload. When I see people through other projects. I see very mixed, lots of actually female entrepreneurs, although I don't put that out necessarily. I do see men, but and then through Harley Street work, I have had a number of university students who I'm really concerned about what they're going through. So I do think we have a problem. But now I think with some hindsight, I would be far more able to put it in the context of a whole system that needs to be looked at. And I would see myself as someone who has neurodiversity as opposed to mental health being my primary thing. Because at the time they thought I had bipolar. I was basically just about to be diagnosed with bipolar, and then that was taken off my record 7 years later. I was taken off the serious mental health register because I didn't have another kind of episode. So yeah, I think that what I say I've learned from the grades thing and how I dealt with it is genuinely what I learned. But for a long time, I would have jollied it up a bit to look a bit more like the fail wasn't a fail.
But there is
LinkedIn fairy dust, I call
LinkedIn,
it.
Oh, I love how great LinkedIn makes everything sound. I think there's such a silver lining though that it actually is true now. That now it isn't a failure. You know, like now you were like, actually, my failure was the decade after that, not that thing. And you know, I can forgive myself for that failure.
It's congruent now.
Why I did that.
Yeah, well, now it doesn't even enter my head that there's anything to forgive, which is weird because before I came on this today, I was like, this is a major cop-out. I need to think of something that's a failure. If I was to think about something raw and like I'm in it now and this is something I battle with, it would be as we said, the RSD and the social stuff. But you know why? Because I work for myself. I work from home. I control my environment 45, 50 hours a week. That's why if I was in the workplace right now and I didn't work for myself and I was commuting and going into an office, I would probably have a list as long as my arm of perceived failures, to be fair, because that changes everything.
It does. And I think that's so funny to me because as you say that, in my head, I'm immediately defending you, going like, no, don't think that. Da, da, da. Meanwhile, did I not 15 minutes ago talk about how I also perceive that as a failure?
And we're here to celebrate failure, remember?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for the reminder.
I love this like authenticity and this dance, this waltz we're doing of, do I accept it? Is it a failure? It's like we play mind games to make things a bit more passable, I guess, to ourselves.
But we're doing that on a continuous basis unconsciously, right?
Absolutely, we
We're
are.
always trying to navigate, and nobody wants to think about their failures as spectacular either, right? Like, and
no, but I like the idea.
Failures aren't. That's also something which I've learned from this podcast. Is I assume that people would come here with these devastating things that had happened. That
oh, interesting.
Gigantic. And actually, even when people have had those devastating failures, those are not the things that they think about for years later.
Oh, that is really interesting.
It's the small ones that really kind of ate away at them. And I think it is our inability to be able to get validation from them because they seem so small and petty. And you do realize that in the greater scheme of the world we are living in this year 2022 of our Lord, you know, things are wild. Things are bad for many people, and it just feels
and people do bad things at times, and you would think that there was, you know, no, I get that. I get that.
That has been a really fun thing that I have learned from hearing other people's lessons is just how hard we are on ourselves about the small failures. We're actually much more willing to forgive the big failures. We have a lot more tolerance for that and a lot more sense of community and sharing the big failures, right? Like,
wow, thank you for sharing that because
really
that's really, I'm really glad I know this because I've not done this project. So you have that overview of all of your guests and you get to learn from the balance of all the people you speak to and get that wisdom from it. And I wouldn't know that as me on my own, not focusing on failure in my work. So that is really interesting. I wonder why. Have you drawn any conclusions as to why?
I think it is about not having spaces where we can talk about that. Back to the point about like, you know, LinkedIn does not seem like the place. Facebook may have your high school and your family and whatever. Like there is no
Mm.
space for that. And especially when we're, you're not trying to be in a my life is worse competition with people you're close to.
Yes.
And sometimes
Yes.
like there are genuinely really tough things happening in people's lives financially, and cost of living crisis is blowing
Yes.
minds now. And it's tough to go and be like, you know what, I'm still upset about this thing that happened 5 years ago that actually has
That's
had
so
no impact on my
true.
career and whatever, right? Because they're like, well, you're still working, you still have a job, you're
Yes.
still renowned in your field. So like, super sorry that this one small thing did not go well for you. This is the story you're probably telling yourself in your mind. Obviously, your friends are not going to say that to you if they're like halfway decent friends.
Yeah,
But
but they
if we're
might be
really,
thinking that in comparison, it's not a
yeah,
biggie.
exactly. Even in comparison to some of your own stuff, it doesn't seem like that big a
Yeah.
deal, right? Because some of my failures that I think of, like my friends and my therapist might be like, well, I don't know if that's the biggest issue that you currently face, but sure, why not? Let's do that, right? So
I like the sound
I
of your
think it
therapist.
is, my therapist is great. Shout out to Kim. I think that is what prevents us from being able to heal from those smaller failures, is because there's nowhere to be able to share it, right? Like you can
There's
get
no
fired
space.
from your job, or you can lose your job and be made redundant and talk about it and
Yeah.
be like, hey, like I messed up, or this company messed up, like someone please help me. Not the same for like, I felt like I was super awkward in that interview and missed this opportunity.
That is so
Like
fascinating. I
there's
guess
nothing,
the smaller
there's no
failures, yeah, I guess that we gaslight ourselves.
on the
I
small
guess
stuff.
that yeah, on the small stuff. And then when someone tells us stuff, maybe it's hard to empathize if we can't relate. And we can't relate when we don't feel those physiological hot and cold flushes you get when you remember something that you felt was embarrassing or shameful or wrong or whatever, failure. And no one else knows what that feels like. So I guess to other people it looks small and then we don't mention it, then it gets hidden, then it becomes a bit like a guilty secret. That's
Yeah.
super. You've really spun my head round on that. I'm gonna go and think about that.
Good. And the thing which I think is, I will end on this because this one for me was like the big thing is
Mm,
we think people will think it's a small deal, but as it turns out,
okay.
they don't. And
Okay.
it turns out they actually are like, oh no, I'm really sorry that you were hurt that way. When we do find these spaces to open up, right? The
Yes,
appropriate spaces
okay.
to open up. Because I thought so many of the failures that I've heard have been around like I didn't look after myself correctly, I didn't say no, I didn't speak up, I
Mm,
didn't, call someone out, etc. They've been real, they seem like they're small failures, but they've
yep.
been so profoundly impacted that they had on those people, or whatever, that I found real empathy and real kind of like, oh, I'm genuinely sorry you went through that. Like,
Yep.
actually, it would be much better if you hadn't. And I think that we actually could find so much more empathy and so much more like understanding, but we've
Yeah.
already pre-qualified and said, no, no, this is too small to take into the world, right?
So don't filter our small failures and just get them out there and maybe be surprised by the reaction we get. Interesting.
Inappropriate spaces. Please don't share that on Twitter. Nobody's gonna, you're not gonna get the good vibes on Twitter if you share
Yeah,
that. But yeah, you've got to find the space first. And that I think is the tough part, is finding
indeed.
where is your space that you can share those things safely and share
Mm,
those things with people who are likely to be able to embrace you in acceptance
mm.
and help you accept that for yourself.
I love that. That's a good message.
Great one to end on. Sarah, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful session. Thank
I love
you.
talking to you. Thank you so much. That was really great. I really appreciated that.